everybody. In this episode today, I'm going to be telling Minecraft Chronicles, a story that I started 4 years ago, and that I'm now going to be telling to you today. Enjoy! Okay, here's my 4-year-old story. Steve walked rapidly across the plains, his hands tied on his sword. Only minutes earlier, he had heard creepers explode nearby. He didn't want to be their next victim. He was out mining when he heard the creepers, so he had iron and redstone in his inventory. He was going back to his house. Steve walked into his house. It was a quaint little cottage. He had a plywood bed in one corner and a warring crafting table in the other. He crafted some necessary tools and walked out the door. Steve climbed out a ravine that he used often, and at the bottom he found an abandoned mine shaft. He exclaimed, surprised, "This wasn't here yesterday. Someone must have been here." Steve walked into the abandoned mine shaft. He heard scuttling and scraping. He knew that it was a cave spider. He was absolutely terrified of spiders. Steve sprinted further into the mine shaft. It was as black as an Enderman, so Steve placed a few of the torches he had made. Then he placed a few more torches, just to be safe. He could see redstone ore in the back of the cave. He went over and mined it, just in case. But then he saw a cave spider advancing forward. Steve took his sword from his inventory. The cave spider advanced forward. Steve slashed the advancing spider with his sword. The cave spider lost HP, health points, but the spider was still alive. The spider shot lethal poison at him, but he blocked the poison with the flat of his blade. He hit the 8-legged pest with the poison ran rampant through the spider's veins. The spider, not immune to its own poison, lay on its back, flailing slower and slower until it plopped into non-existence. Steve picked up the experience and walked further into the mineshaft. While trying to get far away from the spiders, he stumbled upon a skeleton. He quickly sprinted away from it before it could shoot him with its dangerous pointed arrows. After searching thoroughly, he found a large chamber with some valuable diamond ore at the back of it. After he mined it, he moved on to a new part of the abandoned mineshaft. Steve ran into his skeleton again. This time he wasn't so lucky. The skeleton shot an arrow at him. Thankfully, the arrow barely missed him. He took out his sword and hit the skeleton with a mighty blow. The skeleton died, and Steve waited for the little green XP balls to go to him. Then he ran away from that cavern. Steve went to a large underground room with a mineshaft branching away into the blackness. At the end of it, there was a nether portal. Steve had never seen a nether portal. He had only read about it in books. Steve edged forward and tried to mine it, but it was made out of obsidian, and he did not have a diamond pickaxe. He couldn't break it. There was some purple flying stuff around the nether portal. Steve went closer to take a closer look, but then he fell into the nether portal. He climbed out the other side of it. Steve was in the nether. Chapter 2. Into the nether. Steve couldn't believe his eyes. He was in the nether. He had spawned in a nether fortress. Steve might have no idea what a nether portal was, but he knew what a nether fortress was. He knew what dangers are in it, like ghasts, blazes, and wither skeletons, and more. He decided to be careful. He saw a magma cube, bouncing like an evil ball. It drew closer and closer. Steve drew his sword. The magma cube came closer to attack. It jumped on Steve, and he had lost 2 valuable hearts. Then he hit it twice. The magma cube died. That was close, he thought. Then he went to a different part of the nether fortress. He found a loot chest, but there were only flowers. He didn't collect them because they were useless. He walked and eventually came atop a tower. There was a blaze spawner and blazes. There were blazes on all sides of him, except one, the way he had come. He ran that way, hitting blazes left and right. He ran back to the loot chest. This time he collected the flowers. Then a wither skeleton walked up behind him. Steve turned around to face the wither skeleton and saw that it had an iron sword. Chapter 3. The Wither Skeleton. The wither skeleton lunged at Steve. He got hit by the stone sword. His health bar was running low. He couldn't die, not when he had come so far. The wither skeleton struck the next blow. Steve blocked it with his sword, and then he took the cobblestone out of his inventory and placed cobble under him until he was 3 blocks off the ground. Then he jumped onto the wither skeleton and killed it. Steve ran into the next room and looked around his room to see if there were any more wither skeletons. But there weren't. But there was a loot chest with a gold sword. Now Steve had a really good sword, better than his iron sword, and he had gold ingots too. He was rich. Now he could do anything with the gold sword. But while he was admiring his gold sword, a ghast saw him. Chapter 4. The Ghast. Then Steve looked up and saw the ghast, like a white phantom, coming toward him. Steve didn't know what to do. He had only read about ghasts in a book he had borrowed from the village public library. It seemed the only advice was about studying from a distance. The only thing it said about encounters was, "Run!" The ghast shot a fireball at him. Steve turned around and hit the fireball back at the ghast. The ghast shot another fireball at him. The 2 fireballs collided and exploded, taking the ghast with it. And that's the end of the story for today. There is a part 2, but I will tell that one in the next episode. you can see, that story had a lot of mistakes, but I'm actually pretty proud of that because that story did something that you can't buy. You can't buy experience. That story really helped me to shape how I write today, and if without that story, I may not even have this podcast. So I know there were some mistakes. For example, when the cave spider, shot the lethal venom and hit the sword, it was supposed to be simmering sword, but for some reason I didn't have sword on that. I read it just how it was to not make it sound better because I wanted you guys to know how I wrote back then and how that shaped this podcast. Because if you think about it, this podcast is based off that story, that Minecraft story. So thank you guys for listening to the podcast, and you guys can see me grow in writing. It is now time for a quiz. The question is, what is the only two kinds of nether creatures that you can find inside spawners in the nether? The options are A, wither skeleton and blazes, B, wither skeletons and magma cubes, C, blazes and magma cubes, and D, endermen and blazes. Take a moment to gather your decision. The answer is C, blazes and magma cubes. Blaze spawners are found inside nether fortresses, while magma cube spawners are found inside some bastion remnants. To disable the spawner, cover the spawner with non-spawnable blocks. Cover it so that it cannot spawn because the spawn range is not within it. Or, if it's dark, cover it with torches. But that really only works for the overworld one since the nether is pretty lit up with the lava. If you would like to submit your short story or contact me about a question about the show, go to minecraftshortstories.com. To submit your short story, go to the Contact Me page, follow the submission guidelines, and submit your story. And if you would like to ask me about a question for the show, go to the Sign Me Up button after scrolling down on the homepage, sign up to the email, and then I will get some bonus content out and you can ask me for questions about the show or story ideas. Thank you all so much for listening. I will try to get out the part 2 of my 4-year-old story as soon as I can. And thank you for listening.